Hi everyone, maybe movie recap here. This time I will discuss the storyline of a movie called 12-Year Night. The film is based on a true story set in 1973.
No importa los años que pasaron. Lo que importa son los años que te quedan.
It tells the story of the rise of dictatorial regimes in Uruguay after decades of democratic system. Along with the restoration, it also destroyed various forms of groups that opposed the government, including the revolutionary group Tupamaros. On September 7, 1973, 9 members of Tupamaros were arrested and became political prisoners. But in this film, we will focus on 3 members of Tupamaros only. The 3 men are Jose Mujica or Pepe, Mauricio Rosencof and Eleuterio Nato Fernandez. Let's get to the storyline. The film begins by showing soldier Brazil transferring prisoners. They are Pepe, Rosencof and Nato. They are seen being transferred to a prison and separated from each other. On the first day, the soldiers covered their face with cloth and poured gasoline on their heads, then leave it overnight with the intention of making them suffocate. The next day, the soldiers removed their head covering, but their suffering grew when the government banned them from talking to anyone, including the guards. Not only that, the only window in their room was also closed, making them unable to know day and night. A year later, they were transferred to another prison. A general came to them while carrying a decree that the 3 were now not prisoners anymore but as Sandra.
Y vos a tu familia la querés mucho, ¿no?
Because of international law, the government cannot kill all 3, so they will be insane in prison.
Mira la pinta que tiene.
But even so, their family are still allowed to visit. A few months later, they were moved back, but this time they were locked up in an old building on the edge of the forest. Rosencof and Nato were locked next to each other and used wall knocks to communicate, while Pepe is locked up elsewhere, only friends the little ants that accompany him every day so that it keeps him hallucination. On the other hand, Rosencof and Nato are always intimidated and given improper food. Not infrequently, they are also accompanied by guards. They were treated like animals until the doctor told them that this was a barbaric act. One day, Nato's toilet was damaged and forced to be taken to the guard toilet. As his hand continued to be handcuffed, the officer guarding him reported the matter to the surgeon, but the surgeon didn't dare to open his handcuff. He reported it to his superiors, but his superiors didn't dare to open it either. It continues that way until the matter gets to the highest officer, but in the end, Nato had to solve the problem themselves. Day by day, they went through by communicating via tape until one day, the 3 were moved back. This time, they were placed in a very spacious cell, but the guard made a line that they should not cross. Not only is the wall thick enough to make them unable to communicate, this condition makes them even worse. One day, Rosencof heard a guard who was confiding about the woman he liked. Rosencof helped the guard by writing a letter to him.
Embargado por tu ausencia. Pará. Despacio.
Not long after that, a sergeant called Rosencof to his room. He looked very scared, but without him expecting, the sergeant called him to ask him to make a letter to the woman he liked. This is where Rosencof always helped sergeant and he started getting decent food. Not only that, the sergeant also deliberately raised the volume of the radio during the live broadcast of the ball game. That's enough to make them very happy. But the happiness didn't last long as they were moved back. This time, they were placed in a cramped room. It makes Pepe depressed and always hallucinating. Every day, they are just left sitting in the damn room without knowing day and night. A year later, the three were moved back. And this time, they got a decent bed compared to the previous place, and the thing they liked the most was the way could be back to communicating with each other, even if only through tap. Nato got the first visit from his daughter. He also looked so happy. One day, Nato heard when the officer who was writing a letter. He listened to it and wrote in Jose's shop. Before long, the guard went inside their cells to clean their cells and provide decent facilities for all three. They read the news for a long time. The next day, the three were taken to the International Red Cross Committee, but they were only asked to give their names. Shortly afterwards, the guard pulled him back into his cells.
Eleuterio Fernandez Huidobro. Retírese. Retírese, le dije.
After they left, the facilities in the room were again withdrawn, including soap belonging to Nato. It turned out that the facility was only a ploy to cover their suffering in the eyes of the world. Nato was so shocked when a general came from the capital to meet him. It turned out that Nato, who was suffering in such a way, is still suspected because of writing found in his shop. He also reasoned that the writing was a roulette game that he played to accompany his days. It looks like Nato had these guys very much. He remembered the day he was arrested. It turned out that this general was the one who killed his wife and brother. The general also threatened that Nato would never get out of there, but Nato undaunted and said, "If I take responsibility for my mistake, maybe I will die here. But I know my burden, and you, general, do you know the burden you bear?" While Pepe gets his first visit from his mother, he is always depressed and almost give up, but his mother continues to encourage him to stay afloat. After Pepe saw the ceremony next to his room, he shouted and continued to interrupt the event. He was beaten by guards but said he only wanted to get his mother back, and he finally got them. The next day, Pepe was taken to psychiatrist because he always heard a strange voice in his head. Psychiatrists say that Pepe had a psychic disorder. He just needed to rest and calm himself. But Pepe says he has no hope anymore. Hearing that, doctor encouraged you to do as much as possible and maintain whatever can be maintained. The scene moved to 1980, where there was a referendum for the Uruguayan people, who eventually most Uruguayans voted for democracy to return to the country. That gives hope to political prisoners, even if it is still under negotiations. Their days continued to be moved from one prison to another. In 1983, the three returned to prison early when Rosencof helped the sergeant write a letter. And it turned out that the sergeant had now married his lover. He then offered to help Rosencof, but not to food or facilities he asked for, but to meet his friends. It was a full-time meeting because in 10 years they had never met face-to-face. Long story short, in 1984, the three were again transferred to where they were first imprisoned. Here, they get a prisoner's uniform, which means his status is not a political prisoner anymore. One day, with a full weapon, the guard broke Nato into the middle of the field while the prisoner who still recognized him gave encouragement. Seeing that, he acted as a playing ball and scoring goals toward the guard. By celebrating, which signifies the victory of democracy is already in their hands. After 12 years of isolation, they finally returned to the democratic system. Pepe, Rosencof, and Nato and other prisoners were released from exile. They are welcomed by their families who never forget them. They were welcomed like heroes who had just returned from war. At the end of the film, it is explained that Rosencof eventually became a poet and novelist. He was appointed Director of Culture in the city. Nato participated in the field of defense parliament. Pepe was President of Uruguay from 2010 to 2015. And while in office, he refused all presidential facility. He prefers to stay in his garden home and drive his old car to work. Not only that, he also donated some of his salary to people who are more in need and is also referred to as the purest president in the world today. And the movie is finished. Okay, that's the storyline of the movie A 12-Year Night. Don't forget to like and share, subscribe also if not. Thank you for watching, see you in the next video.